The mysterious intruder. John lived a quiet life in a small town, far from the noise of the city. His house had a big backyard, surrounded by a wooden fence. He loved gardening and spent most evenings watering his plants. But lately, something strange had been happening. Every morning, he noticed footprints in the soil near his tomato plants. Some of his vegetables were missing, and he sometimes heard soft footsteps at night. It was odd because his fence was high, and no one had any reason to enter his backyard. At first, he thought it might be a raccoon or a stray cat, but the footprints looked human. Someone was sneaking into his garden at night. One evening, he decided to stay awake and catch the intruder. A silent watch. John sat near his window, watching his backyard carefully. The street outside was quiet, the moon shining softly. Hours passed, but nothing happened. Just when he started to feel sleepy, he heard it, a soft rustling noise near his plants. His heart started pounding. He moved carefully, avoiding making any noise. He peeked outside through the curtains. There was someone in his garden. A shadowy figure was crouched near his plants, picking tomatoes. The person moved quickly, almost too fast for a normal human. John grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside. "Hey, who's there?" he shouted. The figure froze. For a moment, everything was silent. Then suddenly, the intruder turned and ran. But the way they moved, it wasn't normal. The person was too fast, too smooth, like they were gliding instead of running. John's eyes widened. His backyard had only one exit, the locked gate, but the figure jumped over the high fence in one leap. John stood frozen, his flashlight shaking in his hand. What did he just see? A strange clue. The next morning, John went to check his backyard. He looked at the ground where the intruder had been. The footprints were still there, but they looked strange. Instead of normal shoe prints, the marks on the soil were longer, slightly curved. It almost looked like the person had different feet than a human. John felt a chill run down his spine. Who, or what, had been in his garden? Determined to find out, he set up a small camera near the plants. If the intruder came back, he would have proof. Caught on camera. That night, John stayed inside but checked his phone, connected to the camera. Hours passed, and nothing happened. But just when he was about to turn it off, movement appeared on the screen. The intruder was back. John watched in shock. It was a woman, or at least she looked like one. She had long silver hair and wore a dark cloak. But what caught John's attention the most were her eyes. They glowed softly in the dark, silver, like the moonlight. John's hands trembled as he zoomed in on the footage. The woman moved differently, her body shifting in an unnatural way. She was graceful but too quick. Then, just before she disappeared from the camera's view, she turned slightly, revealing something shocking. Her skin had a faint bluish tint. John felt his breath hitch. She wasn't normal. She wasn't human. Face to face. Determined, John decided he would catch her tonight. He took a small wooden stick and sat outside, hidden behind his porch. He waited, heart pounding. Finally, just past midnight, she returned. She moved silently, her silver eyes scanning the garden. John took a deep breath and stepped out from his hiding place. "Stop right there," he said firmly. The woman gasped and turned to run, but John moved quickly and grabbed her wrist. Her skin was ice cold. She stared at him, her silver eyes wide in shock. Up close, she looked human, except for the slight shimmer on her skin. For a few seconds, they just stood there, staring at each other. Then, in a voice that was soft yet strange, she spoke. "I am not supposed to be seen." John's heart pounded harder. Before he could respond, she suddenly twisted her wrist, breaking free from his grip. Then, with an impossible leap, she vanished into the darkness. John stood there, frozen. His mind was racing. Who was she? Where did she come from? And the biggest question of all, if she wasn't supposed to be seen, what else was she hiding? The alien neighbor. John barely slept that night. His mind was racing with questions. Who was she? Where did she come from? And most importantly, was she dangerous? He replayed the events over and over. The way she moved, the unnatural speed, the glowing silver eyes. Everything about her screamed not human. But the strangest part, when he had grabbed her wrist, she had felt real. Not like a ghost or a hallucination. Her skin had been cold, but she had been there. This wasn't his imagination. She was real. And she was hiding something. John had to find out what. The abandoned house. The next morning, John went outside and stared at the old house next door. It had been empty for years. At least, that's what he thought. But now he wasn't so sure. The house had peeling paint and broken windows, and the front yard was overgrown with weeds. Nobody had lived there in a long time, or so he had believed. John slowly approached the side fence. His heart pounded. He knew it was crazy. What if she attacked him? But curiosity burned inside him. He carefully climbed over the fence and landed softly in the tall grass. The house was silent. Then he saw it. Near the side door, hidden in the weeds, was a set of footprints. Not human. The prints were longer, thinner, and curved. John swallowed hard. She wasn't human, but she lived here. A strange encounter. Taking a deep breath, John knocked on the rusty door. Nothing. He knocked again, louder. Still silence. Just as he was about to turn away, the door creaked open. John's breath caught in his throat. She was standing there. Her silver eyes glowed softly in the dim light, staring at him with surprise. Up close, she was even stranger. Her bluish skin shimmered faintly, like it was reflecting light that wasn't there. She wore a loose dark cloak, and her silver hair fell over her shoulders. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she did something unexpected. She sighed. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. Her voice was smooth, almost musical, but there was a hint of exhaustion. John's mind raced. He had expected her to run, to attack, or maybe even to deny everything. But instead, she looked tired, like someone who had been hiding for a very, very long time. John took a step forward. "Who are you?" She hesitated. Then, in a soft voice, she said, "I am Aria. Not Emma. Not Emily. Aria." It didn't sound like a normal name. It sounded alien. A dangerous secret. John's mouth went dry. Aria glanced around nervously, then pulled him inside and shut the door behind them. The inside of the house was dark and cold. Dust covered the floor, but in the center of the living room, there was something strange. A small glowing device sat on a table, pulsing softly. It hummed with energy. The air felt charged, like static before a storm. John stared at it. "What is that?" Aria didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied him, as if deciding whether she could trust him. Finally, she sighed. "I am. Not from here," she admitted. John's heart skipped a beat. "Not from this town?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. Aria shook her head. "Not from this planet." John exhaled slowly. He had known, but hearing it out loud was different. She was an alien, a real, living, breathing alien. But if she was here, alone, hiding, that meant something else. "Why are you here?" John asked. "Are you hiding from something?" Aria's silver eyes flickered. "Yes." John felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you hiding from?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Them." The Watchers. Before John could ask who them meant, Aria's expression changed. Her silver eyes widened in alarm, and she grabbed his arm. "Get down," she hissed. John barely had time to react before she dragged him behind a shelf. A second later, a loud humming noise filled the air. John's stomach twisted. The sound was not human. Aria peeked through the broken window. Her breath was shallow, her body tense. John risked a glance. His blood ran cold. A black car had pulled up outside. Men in dark suits stepped out. They weren't holding weapons, but something about them felt off. One of them looked up directly at the window, as if sensing something. Aria pressed her back against the wall, closing her eyes, barely breathing. John didn't understand what was happening, but one thing was clear. Whoever these people were, they weren't looking for him. They were looking for her. The secret she hides. John could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He and Aria stayed perfectly still behind the shelf, barely breathing. Outside, the black car sat motionless. The men in dark suits stood near the sidewalk, scanning the area. One of them, a tall, pale man with sharp features, tilted his head slightly. His movements were too precise, too unnatural. His cold blue eyes swept the street like a machine analyzing data. John's stomach twisted. These men weren't normal. "They're here for me," Aria whispered, her voice barely audible. John swallowed hard. "Who are they?" Aria hesitated. Then she whispered one word. "Seekers." The name sent a chill through John's spine. Seekers. It sounded wrong, like something that shouldn't exist. Outside, the tall man in the suit turned his head abruptly toward the house. John felt a sinking feeling. He knows. He knows we're in here. The chase begins. The man raised a hand. The car doors opened by themselves, and more figures stepped out. John's instincts screamed, "We have to go. Now." Aria was already moving. She grabbed a small glowing device from the table and stuffed it inside her cloak. Then she turned to him. "Follow me." She sprinted toward the back of the house, moving with that unnatural speed. John ran after her, his pulse racing. Just as they reached the back door, bang! The front door exploded inward. The seekers were inside. John barely had time to register what happened before Aria grabbed his arm and yanked him forward. They burst into the backyard, sprinting toward the fence. "How do we?" John started to ask. But then Aria jumped. Not climbed, jumped. She leaped 10 feet into the air and landed smoothly on the other side. John skidded to a stop, staring. "What the?" "Move," she hissed. Behind them, heavy footsteps thudded through the house. The seekers were coming. John had no time to think. He scrambled up the fence, his arms burning as he pulled himself over. As soon as he dropped down, Aria grabbed his wrist and dragged him into the trees behind the house. They ran. A strange power. Branches whipped against John's face as they raced through the forest. His lungs burned, but Aria wasn't even out of breath. "Where are we going?" he gasped. Aria didn't answer. She only pressed a small device on her wrist. Immediately, John felt something change. The air shimmered around them. It was like the forest was bending, distorting. John blinked. His eyes couldn't focus. A second later, the sound of the seekers' footsteps disappeared. They were still there. John knew they were. But suddenly, they couldn't see him. His heart nearly stopped. "What did you do?" Aria looked at him, her silver eyes unreadable. "I changed how light bends around us. They won't find us. Not yet." John exhaled, trying to process what just happened. She could manipulate light, but before he could ask, Aria suddenly staggered. She clutched her chest, her breathing ragged. John's stomach twisted. "What's wrong?" She didn't answer right away. She pressed a hand against a tree for support. "Using my abilities, it drains me." John frowned. This was the first time he had seen her look weak. Something about that scared him. Before he could say anything, Aria looked up, urgency in her eyes. "We can't stop. We have to keep moving." John nodded, pushing aside his fear. Whoever these seekers were, one thing was clear. They were hunting her. And now, they were hunting him too. A deadly warning. An hour later, After running through the woods, they finally stopped near an abandoned barn. Area pressed a small circular device against the barn wall. Immediately, the inside lit up. John's jaw dropped. The inside of the barn was not a barn at all. It was a hidden refuge. Metal walls, screens glowing with data, strange symbols carved into the floor, a small floating orb that emitted a soft blue glow. John turned to Area. "What is this?" "My hiding place," she admitted. John ran a hand through his hair. "This is insane." Area looked at him seriously. "It's about to get worse." John frowned. "Worse than being chased by men in suits." Area didn't smile. Instead, she took out a small black chip and placed it on a metal console. Immediately, a hologram appeared in front of them. John's blood turned cold. It was a list of names. His name was on it. And under his name, STATUS, eliminate. John's body turned numb. "What is this?" Area looked at him, her expression unreadable. "This is why I ran," she said softly. John felt his knees go weak. The Seekers weren't just after her. They had been watching him too. A dangerous truth. John stared at the hologram, his name glowing red under the cold words. STATUS, eliminate. His throat tightened. "Why is my name on this?" Area's silver eyes darkened. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "They don't just hunt me," she said quietly. "They erase anyone who gets too close to the truth." John felt his stomach drop. "The truth about what?" Area exhaled, running a hand through her silver hair. "The Seekers aren't human," she admitted. John had already suspected that, but hearing it aloud made his skin crawl. "They don't belong to Earth. They've been here for decades, hiding in your governments, your corporations, your media." She turned to the hologram, swiping the display. More names appeared: scientists, journalists, military officials, all marked with the same chilling status. They remove anyone who figures out what they really are. John swallowed hard. "And what are they?" Area finally looked at him. "They're not just aliens, John. They're infiltrators." The truth about the Seekers. John felt his knees go weak. "You're saying they've been living among us?" Area nodded grimly. "They came long before me. They don't conquer planets with war. They take control from the inside. Slowly, silently." She gestured at the screen. "Governments, research facilities, corporations, they replace people, one by one. No one notices. No one questions." John's heart pounded. "And you? Where do you fit into all this?" Area hesitated. Then, finally, she answered. "I escaped from them." John's breath caught. "You were one of them." Area shook her head. "I was their prisoner." She turned away, her hands tightening into fists. "They took my people, my family, my world." Her voice was raw, filled with something deeper than anger, pain. "They used us for experiments, studied us, stole from us, and when they had everything they needed." She stopped, took a shaky breath. "They burned my planet to the ground." John's blood ran cold. The Seekers weren't just invaders. They were extinctors. The message in the sky. Before John could respond, something flashed outside. A bright red beam shot across the night sky. Area's head snapped up. "They found us." John's body tensed. "Already. They're tracking me. They have ways, machines that can scan for my biosignature." John ran to the barn door and peered outside. In the distance, he saw a dark aircraft hovering over the treetops. It made no sound. It had no lights, but its shape shifted in the air, like a living shadow. "That's not a normal ship," John muttered. Area's expression darkened. "It's not a ship. It's a hunter." John turned to her. "What does that mean?" Area clenched her jaw. "It means we run. A desperate escape." Without another word, she grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the back exit. As they burst into the forest, the air behind them cracked. A sharp, high-pitched sound filled the air, like metal grinding against metal. John turned his head, and his blood went ice-cold. A figure was standing in the doorway. It wore a black suit, but its face wasn't human. The skin was smooth, almost wax-like. The eyes were pitch-black, empty voids. And when it opened its mouth, there were no teeth, only darkness. It stepped forward, moving in a way no living thing should, faster than a blink. John didn't even have time to scream before Iria grabbed him and vanished. Not ran, vanished. The leap through space. For a terrifying second, John felt like he was falling through nothing. The world blurred around him. Then, thud, he hit the ground, gasping for breath. John looked up and realized they weren't in the forest anymore. They were in a dark, metallic hallway. The walls pulsed with faint blue light. The air smelled clean, but strange. Iria groaned beside him, gripping her head. John struggled to his feet. "Where are we?" Iria blinked up at him, her silver eyes glowing softly in the dark. "A ship," she whispered. John's pulse hammered. "A ship." Iria took a deep breath. "My ship." John's heart stopped. "You have a ship." She slowly nodded. "Then why the hell have we been running this whole time?" he demanded. Iria gave him a look. "Because it wasn't ready to fly." John exhaled sharply. "And now?" She hesitated. Then, with a slow smile, she reached for a panel on the wall and pressed a single button. Immediately, the ship shook to life. The floor rumbled beneath them. A deep, thrumming energy filled the air. John felt a strange weightlessness settle over him. Iria turned to him, her expression serious. "You're not safe on Earth anymore, John." He swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" Iria's silver eyes flashed. "We leave." John felt his entire world shift. He was about to leave Earth. To go where? And more importantly, would he ever come back? Betrayal and escape. John's entire world had just turned upside down. One minute, he was running through the forest with alien assassins on his tail. The next, he was on a spaceship, about to leave Earth. His heart pounded as the ship hummed with energy, the walls pulsing with an eerie blue light. He could feel the subtle vibration beneath his feet. This was real. This was happening. Iria stood at the control panel, her silver eyes scanning a holographic screen as alien symbols flickered across it. John swallowed hard. "Are we actually flying?" Iria glanced at him. "Not yet." She pressed something on the panel. The ship shuddered. "Now we are." John's stomach lurched as the ship rose from the ground. Through a curved window, he saw the Earth getting smaller. His home, his planet, and he was leaving it. Forever. He didn't know. Not alone. John took a deep breath, trying to process everything. Seekers, aliens, a secret war. And now he was flying off the planet with an alien fugitive. "This is insane," he muttered. Iria smirked. "You're handling it better than most humans would." John was about to respond, but then something beeped. Iria's expression darkened. "What?" John asked, his stomach twisting. She stared at the screen. "We're not alone." John frowned. "You mean the Seekers?" Iria shook her head. "No, something else." Before John could ask what she meant, a warning siren blared. The ship's lights flickered. The air grew heavier. Then, suddenly, something slammed into them. The traitor in their midst. The ship spun violently. John crashed against the wall, barely catching himself. "What the hell was that?" he shouted. Iria's hands flew over the controls. "Something lashed onto us." John's heart pounded. "Seekers." Iria didn't answer. Because at that moment, a voice echoed through the ship. A cold, hollow voice. "There is nowhere to run, Iria." John froze. The voice was coming from inside the ship. Aria's face went pale. John's blood turned to ice. Tell me that's not what I think it is. Aria slowly turned. A figure stepped out from the shadows. John's breath caught in his throat. It was someone he recognized. His neighbor. The old man from down the street. The one who always smiled at him. Only now, his face was wrong. The skin was too smooth, too perfect. His eyes were pitch black. And when he smiled, his teeth were razor sharp. John's stomach churned. No, no way. You. The seeker tilted its head. You trusted too easily, John. Aria's hands glowed with energy. You followed us. The seeker smiled wider. I never left. John's breath hitched. It had been on the ship the whole time. Fight or die. Aria didn't hesitate. She raised her hand, and a blast of blue light shot forward. The seeker dodged unnaturally fast, moving like a blur. John stumbled backward, his mind racing. The ship was still spinning from the impact. He had no weapon, no plan. And now, he was trapped in a metal box with a monster. Aria lunged. She twisted, moving with inhuman speed, throwing another energy blast. This time, she hit. The seeker screeched, its body flickering like a glitching screen. But then, it snapped its head toward her and grinned. Not strong enough. It hissed. John's stomach flipped. The seeker rushed forward, faster than anything he had ever seen. Straight for Aria. John moved without thinking. He grabbed the closest thing he could, a metal rod, and swung. The rod connected with the seeker's head. For a split second, the creature staggered. Aria didn't waste the chance. She pressed a small device against its chest. A high-pitched whine filled the air. And then the seeker screamed. Its body shuddered, then disintegrated into mist. Silence. Aria panted, lowering her hand. John's hand shook. Is it gone? Aria didn't answer. Instead, she looked at the screen, and her expression turned to horror. John followed her gaze. His breath caught. Outside the ship, through the window, a massive fleet was waiting. Dark, sharp, predatory ships. Hundreds of them, and every single one was pointed at them. The final stand. The fleet of seeker ships hovered outside, dark and silent, like predators circling wounded prey. John's breath hitched. There were hundreds of them. Tell me you have a plan, he whispered. Aria's silver eyes flickered between fear and determination. She clenched her jaw. I have one. John exhaled, relieved, until she added, but it's not a good one. His stomach twisted. Why do I feel like I won't like it? Aria didn't answer. Instead, she moved to the control panel and started pressing symbols that glowed beneath her fingers. The ship hummed, and the air around them grew heavier. The lights flickered. John's pulse pounded. What are you doing? Aria's voice was deadly calm. I'm setting the ship to self-destruct. John nearly choked. You're HA8. She turned to him, her expression grim. We can't outrun them. We can't outfight them. Her silver eyes locked onto his. But we can make sure they don't get what they want. John's blood ran cold. The truth about John. John stepped back, shaking his head. No, no way. That's insane. Aria took a slow breath. Listen to me. She walked toward him, her voice softer. You don't understand why they want you, do you? John frowned. They don't want me. They want you. Aria shook her head. They wanted me. She pointed toward the glowing symbols on the screen. But they were tracking you. John's chest tightened. What are you talking about? Aria hesitated. Then she whispered, John, you're not fully human. Silence. The words felt like a bomb in his head. He laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. That's ridiculous. Aria stepped closer. Is it? Her voice was steady, certain. Think about it, John. Have you ever felt different? Faster? Stronger? ever healed faster than normal. John froze. He had. As a kid, he had broken his arm in a fall. The doctor said it would take 6 weeks to heal. It took 6 days. And that wasn't the only time. His pulse pounded. That doesn't mean anything. Aria's gaze was piercing. It means everything. She took a deep breath. The Seekers are not just hunting me, John. They were waiting for you to find me, to lead you here. John's stomach twisted. Why? Aria's expression darkened. Because, John, you're the last piece of whatever they've been building. The infiltrators' plan. John barely had time to process the shock before the ship shuddered violently. They're trying to board us, Aria shouted. John turned to the screen. The largest Seeker ship was moving closer, deploying mechanical tendrils that stretched toward them like hungry fingers. They're pulling us in, John said, his voice hoarse. Aria gritted her teeth. Not if I can help it. She pressed another sequence on the controls. The ship lurched downward. John slammed into the wall as the gravity shifted. The ship plummeted. The Seeker's tractor beam strained, but Aria's ship was fighting back. John grabbed onto a railing, his mind racing. We can't just fall. We need a plan. Aria clenched her fists. I told you. We crash. John felt sick. That's not a plan. That's suicide. Aria turned to him, her silver eyes burning. It's survival. And then, she cut the engines. The ship free-fell, crash landing on the unknown world. The Seeker fleet roared overhead, scrambling to adjust. Aria's ship spiraled downward, cutting through thick clouds. John could barely breathe. The force pressed against his chest, making his vision blur. The ship's hull burned as it entered the atmosphere of an unknown planet. Everything outside was a storm of red dust and lightning. Hold on, Aria yelled. John barely had time to grab the nearest metal bar before. Boom. The ship slammed into the ground. Darkness. Silence. Then, pain. John groaned, his vision blurry. His head pounded. The ship was broken, smoke filling the air. Sparks flickered from the broken control panels. Aria lay unconscious next to him, her cloak torn. John pushed himself up, coughing. He looked outside and froze, because they weren't alone. Figures stood outside the wreckage, their glowing white eyes staring at him through the swirling dust. They weren't Seekers. They weren't human. And they had been waiting for him. A new beginning. Smoke curled around the wreckage of the ship. Sparks flickered from broken wires, and the air was thick with the scent of burning metal and ozone. John groaned, pushing himself upright. His body ached, but he was alive. He turned to Aria. She was still unconscious, her silver hair matted with dust, her breathing shallow. But before he could reach her, he heard it. The footsteps. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. John's pulse spiked. He turned his head and froze. The figures surrounding the ship had glowing white eyes. Their skin shimmered in the dim light, shifting like liquid metal. They were tall, too tall, and they moved in perfect synchronization. They weren't Seekers, but they weren't human either. And worst of all, they were waiting for him. The forgotten memory. John instinctively stepped in front of Aria, his heart pounding. "Who are you?" he demanded. One of the figures stepped forward. The air around it hummed with strange energy. When it spoke, its voice was not a voice. It was inside his head. "You are home." John's breath caught. "What?" The figure tilted its head. "You do not remember." John felt his fingers curl into fists. "Remember what?" The figure lifted a hand. A soft pulse of energy spread through the air, washing over him like a warm wave. And then, it hit him. Visions, flashes of a different sky, a different world. A place where people like Aria's kind and his own lived together. A place where he had once belonged. Then, flames. War, the sky turning black. And the Seekers. their ships descending like shadows swallowing the light. John gasped, his knees buckling. His mind was being ripped open, his past flooding back. He wasn't just an ordinary human. He wasn't just an accident. He was one of them, the last of his kind. And the Seekers had been hunting him all along. Aria's choice. John staggered back, struggling to breathe. His entire existence had been a lie. Aria stirred beside him, groaning as she slowly woke up. She blinked groggily at the figures, then at John. She saw the horrified look on his face. "John," she rasped. John looked at her, really looked at her. She had been running, fighting, hiding for so long. And she had saved him, over and over. But she hadn't known. She had no idea that the one person she had trusted wasn't human at all. And now she did. Aria's silver eyes searched his face. "Tell me this isn't what it looks like." John opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, he already knew the truth. He wasn't just caught in this war. He was the reason for it. The final decision. The tallest of the figures turned to John. "You must decide." John swallowed. "Decide what?" The figure's glowing eyes flashed. "To return with us. To reclaim your place. Or to stay and be hunted forever." John's breath caught. Leave Earth. Go with them. Be part of something bigger. Something he couldn't even remember. He looked at Aria. She was staring at him, eyes wide. Her expression a mix of fear, anger, and something else. Pain. He had fought beside her. He had nearly died for her. She had risked everything for him. And now he had to choose. Go with his own kind. Or stay with her. The weight of the decision crushed him. And then, he made his choice. The end of one story, the start of another. John turned to Aria. His voice was steady. "I'm staying." Her eyes widened. "John." But he shook his head. "This is my home. I don't care where I came from. Earth is my home." He turned back to the beings. "I won't leave it behind." For a moment, there was silence. Then the tallest figure bowed its head slightly. "Then we leave you with a gift." John tensed as the being pressed a hand against his chest. A surge of warmth spread through his body. His vision sharpened. His mind cleared. His senses expanded. And suddenly, he understood. The power inside him. What he was capable of. And what he had to do. The beings turned away. Their bodies shimmered. And in an instant, they were gone. John staggered back, breathing hard. His body felt different. Stronger. Aria was still staring at him. "You really meant it," she whispered. "You're staying." John met her gaze. "I am." She exhaled, her expression softening. "Then let's finish this." John looked up at the sky, where the Seeker fleet still loomed. For the first time, he wasn't afraid. For the first time, he was ready. The war wasn't over. But now, it wasn't just Aria's fight anymore. It was his.